A very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to welcome you to the 156th BSL webinar and the fourth episode of the fifth webinar series, Beyond Code Practice. The webinars are conducted on the Zoom platform, and for those who have been unable to register on Zoom, could also join by watching the live stream on the BSL YouTube channel. These webinar series are organized by the Seminars Committee of the BSL, Chairman of the Seminars Committee and the Secretary of BSL, Mr. Rajiv Amarasuriya, whose brainchild the BSL webinar series is, Convener of the Seminars Committee and Assistant Secretary of BSL, Mr. Pasindu Silva, and co-conveners, Mr. Pandula Vaniarachi, Mr. Oshan Uberatna, Ms. Ann Devananda, and Ms. Nikini Mapitigama. I further take this opportunity to thank the President of the BSL, Mr. Saile Piris, President's Council, and the other members of the Management Committee of the BSL for all the support and guidance. Today's episode is with Dr. Hiran W. Javardhana, Attorney at Law, Secretary General of Indian Ocean Marine Affairs Corporation, and interviewed by Mr. Chanakya Jayadeva, Attorney at Law. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Jayadeva to take over. So over to you.
Thank you, Malik, and thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to Beyond Code Practice, the fourth episode on the series of Beyond Code Practice. And like Malik said, it's the 156th episode of the webinar series BSL has been conducting for now nearly 2 years. And Dr. Hiran Javardhana, thank you for taking time off and thank you for keeping up late in where you are now and joining us today. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Yes.
Rather late, but it's all right.
Yes, Dr. Hiran Javardhana is, as you know, he's an attorney at law with 2 LLB honors. He has 2 degrees in law, and there's both honors, one from Colombo and one from Canterbury. And the other one, a PhD also from Canterbury. He also was awarded from the University of Brunei honoris causa doctorate on literature. We got a lot to talk about, Dr. Hiran, but first tell me, you just told me your practice area is your background picture, which is the law of the sea, I suppose. But before that, how did you get into law?
How did I get into law? Up to A-levels, the first year of A-levels, I was in the science stream. I had to think seriously about the future. I found certain aspects of science fascinating. And then I had to take a decision. I decided to switch in my second year to arts and find an easier passage into university, which I reached in 1969. And I come from a family with a long tradition in law. So it was quite normal for me to go into the law. If I didn't, it would have been questioned as to why I didn't go there. But I was drawn to law, which seemed the viable option at the time. So I ended up in the law faculty.
And your father was one of the very famous and very capable lawyers in that era, H.W. Javardhana, and he's none other than the brother of our former president, first executive president, J.R. Javardhana. He is also part of the architect of our current constitution. Now, being such a son of such a good practitioner, you never took into practice in law, did you, doctor? Is there a reason for that?
The way events unfolded, I completed my LLB and looked to further my studies overseas, as many people did. I had the opportunity to go to Cambridge. By the way, I went to Cambridge, not Canterbury. And I took the LLB there. As you probably know, in Cambridge, the LLB is a postgraduate degree. The first is a tripos, or the BA that people get. And I wanted to specialize in international law. I had taken an interest in international law in Colombo and took what they call the Section D, Public International Law. I was fortunate to come out with the first from that examination. And I was still interested. I felt that Cambridge had much more to offer me. And I was curious to explore those avenues. And it resulted in my trying to register for a PhD. I remember my supervisor, eventually my supervisor, Dr. Derek Bowett, he said, you have to have money if you want to do a PhD. So he saw some talent in my ability to do research, said, let's look for some money. It's good for young people to know these things, how they happen. I wrote no less than 50 letters to potential sponsoring organizations. I had very polite letters, all ending with a very polite no. Letters 49 and 50 were both positive, and I got double grants to do my research. So I was relieved of that problem. I was able to embark on the research. And the facilities were excellent. The whole Square library, it has been modernized now. And I continued with my PhD. Now, what happened is I was planning to finish this work a little beyond what I'd planned and return to Sri Lanka and join my father at his practice. And as you asked, many people were surprised that I didn't go that way. When I was completing my PhD, I had a call from Colombo one day from the Director General of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Manikalingam. Unfortunately, he's no longer there. And he said, our Minister of Foreign Affairs is passing through London. He would like to meet you. So would you kindly meet him in London? So I went down to London and met Mr. Hamid. I got to know very well later on. And he explained to me that he had to put together a new delegation for the law of the sea. There were political changes in 1977. And would I come in? I said, yes, but I'm raw. I just done my work on the law of the sea. I'm still completing my PhD. He said, no, that's all right. You seem to have more ability than the people we have at our disposal now. So would you kindly accede? So I could not say no. And I did not know what was to unfold. And I proceeded to Geneva shortly after that to join the Law of the Sea Conference. In fact, I had written to Mr. Shirley Amarasinghe, who was president of the conference at that time, asking whether I could go to the conference as a student. And it's a wonderful opportunity to join the conference, simply for purpose of research and meeting people. But here I had an opportunity, the ringside seat. And I joined the conference in, I think, late March 1978. It's a long time ago. So when I went there, there was a major problem at the conference. Mr. Shirley Amarasinghe had also been taken away by the new government. And I met him. He was a wonderful man, happy to have got to know him. And he told me one day, Iran, I've been out of touch with events in Sri Lanka, political and otherwise. He had been in New York as perm rep for 13 years. Normally it's about 3 years or sometimes you get a second term. And he was pragmatic enough to accept that. But then there was a lot of lobbying to keep Shirley Amarasinghe, who was a wonderful president of the conference. And the UN took certain steps, sent the Undersecretary General for Law of the Sea, Bernardo Zuleta, to Colombo. He stayed at the Intercontinental Hotel for 3 days, unable to get an appointment to call on the president. And he went back to New York. Then another attempt was made to the US ambassador in Colombo, and he called on the president. The president was obliged to see him. And he made the same request, could we put Shirley Amarasinghe back on the Sri Lanka delegation? I'm going into this detail because younger people should understand this. There is politics and diplomacy involved in this. And Andrew Young was a US permanent representative to the United Nations. Shortly before that, he had been removed from his position because the Israeli lobby got active and accused him of having meetings with the Palestinians. And President Jayawardena, I know the president or prime minister at the time, he told the US ambassador, would you put Andrew Young on your delegation at my request? The answer was clearly no. US could not do that. So they could not make such a demand on Sri Lanka. Then I had arrived in Geneva. The whole conference was deadlocked. It cost several $1 million for the 2-week delay in starting up the conference. And for me, it was a baptism under fire. We were at the center of this controversy. Lots of negotiations, discussions going on. And finally, it was resolved that the conference would put to the government of Sri Lanka a question. if we can find a way to give a mandate to keep Shirley Amarasinghe, would there be an objection from the government of Sri Lanka? And our answer was clearly no. BJ Fernando was a lawyer, as you know, he was perm rep in New York, and I was by his side, and he showed me the paper, and he scribbled on that, no, that Sri Lanka had no objection. The government was not being vindictive, but that they had taken a principled stand. So thereafter, that night, there was a vote. And I remember the African delegations gave us support. There's another story behind that, but thundering into the night, all these speeches in support of Shirley Amarasinghe. So Shirley was elected president, or given a mandate to continue as president, and we resumed our work. So he was the president who cost several $1 million. And thereafter, during this period when the conference was in suspense, I started reviewing the Sri Lanka position. And I was aware that we were trying to define the continental margin, the boundary you see behind me. Just to my shoulder, you can see certain lines running down below. That is the outer rim. And I remembered as a student the National Geographic map of the seafloor of the Indian Ocean. And I thought that bluish patch you see, dark blue patch extending from the east of Sri Lanka southward, was something like a mudslide. Later I found that it was indeed something like that. It was called a submarine fan. And that little awareness helped me. So once we applied the formula that was being negotiated by the conference, I felt that it was going to cut us short by how much we had to calculate as a one-man delegation at that time, because BJ Fernando returned to Colombo for a conference, an online conference. And I had the help of the Indian delegation, Rear Admiral Frank Fraser. He and I sat down on his little briefcase and made a calculation. So, result of this long story I've been telling you is that I had to go in and object to the rules that were being formulated. There was a consensus that we were working on. To break the consensus, I had to enter formal objection from Sri Lanka. When I did that, I trapped myself into a situation because I had worked out a formula to make an exception for Sri Lanka. Had I walked out of that conference at that point and gone back to practice, this would never have been negotiated. Even today, we are short of people who understand what we did. So I was trapped to completing this negotiation. I thought it could be done quickly. It took me several years at the conference. And we came up with a consensus supporting an exception for Sri Lanka. It is fairly complex what was done. There's a lot of science, technology, and law involved, but it was done eventually. And much of that came on my shoulders. So I couldn't walk away. I tried coming back, trying to pick up a practice. And then I had to travel in between for negotiations. I was continuously traveling from country to country, negotiating the organizations, etc.
So, Dr.
I didn't come back to practice.
Yeah, you were involved in, if I may see the demarcations you have done in that map, you were involved in winning that sea area for Sri Lanka. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Like so this is a lot of background work went into it, and I know it's very difficult to say in short time. And subsequent to that, is there something you want to conclude when I interrupted?
Sorry, go ahead.
Is there anything more you wanted to conclude when I interrupted?
No, that's all right. If you understand that I engaged myself in another negotiation, I was unable to leave that because I knew the magnitude. We were to lose 350,000 square miles. How does a young man walk away from that and leave his country? I couldn't do that.
Yeah. Doctor, afterwards, you got involved with Nara, I think the formation of Nara itself.
Yeah.
And you were the first chairman of that. Can you tell us what was it like? Your whole involvement.
Well, Nara was also a direct outgrowth of what I did at the conference, because I realized that if I went back to my country, it's still not done, almost 18 or 90% done, and said, here, we have 350,000 square miles of extra seabed territory. That's for you now. What does Sri Lanka do with it? Much of it is lying at great depths of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 meters. and we knew nothing of the technology, nothing of the resources. So of what use is a gift like that to your country? No, the country did not have the ability to understand the potential of this area or to deal with it. And that's how Nara came into existence. There was no organization. In fact, I left my PhD research in Cambridge and returned early to Sri Lanka at the end of 1978. And we had a meeting in the Foreign Ministry with all the officials of the various government agencies that might have contributed. The conclusion at the end was, you better get a foreign consultant. And I was shattered that there was no capacity in Sri Lanka. So I sat with Mr. Hamid, a small table lamp. I remember this very well. He was quiet. Then he looked at me. He knew what I had done. I'd given up my research and come back. So he said, what? I said, well, sir, I have read. I have the capacity for research. When I entered this objection in April 1978 and went back to Cambridge, I read everything I could find. Department of Geology, strange things happened. I went straight to the writings on this margin that I needed. I found the articles where people knew Sri Lanka had a problem. And I realized at that point that we had to have capacity. Now this fell on my shoulders. The way to go was to build an organization. I had anticipated that earlier made proposal. People did not understand. They thought I was advocating an organization dealing with fisheries. I said, no, this is much more than fisheries. It's multidisciplinary. That's what we need. And Nara was formed. I was given the mandate to create Nara. And we recruited geologists and others, a number of people. I must say that I was building capacity for Sri Lanka in these fields necessary to carry on these negotiations and to deal with the offshore area. Today, there are a few people at Nara and outside. One person I was able to build up at that time in sedimentology to deal with the negotiations on this still remains. Like me, there are two of us now. And there are others who have joined, but the real capacity was there. So I want to tell you that the law is always a countervailing interest. One day I was driving to work and I see this vessel through the fence in the harbor. There is no fence now, there's a wall. I used to look at the ships in the harbor. And one ship looked very familiar. And I asked the harbor master, called him and said, what is that ship? He said, it's the American vessel. And they're doing some research. Now, ships don't just come all the way from those ports to Sri Lanka unless they're working off Sri Lanka. And it was the sister ship for the Gloma Challenger. You must have heard Howard Hughes' ship brought up a submarine. And this vessel was going to drill some holes south of Sri Lanka. The alarm bells went off immediately. This is the territory that we are claiming. And cut a long story short, they had no authorization. It was a question of a legal act. I moved with the Foreign Ministry to detain the vessel. So we detained the vessel for several days till someone from the US Embassy found me. And I said, look, very simple, we sign an agreement in keeping with the law of the sea, texts that are developing, and we will let you go. But more important, I got one man on board. That is a gentleman who's with me now. And he was trained on that vessel, subsequently did a PhD. So that was a very valuable opportunity we got, thanks to the law of the sea.
Doctor, you mentioned about the fishing and everything. As you would know, there are two recurring problems. We have actually one recurring problem about the Indian fishermen crossing over. Indian fishermen crossing over to our area, and especially the north area, and creating problem and fishing. And the issue about bottom trawling, which has come up from time and time again. What is the reason for these things to come up? Was the area what you negotiated and got in as not developed after that, or is there any gray areas on the Sri Lanka Sea area? What is the reason for that?
The boundary is very clear in Pork Bay with the northern part. 1974 boundary. In fact, in 74, I was on Kathathivu Island, camping there with the army, because I was working on Kathathivu for a master's thesis, which I never completed. I left that and went abroad on Indo-Lanka relations, with special reference to Gulf of Mannar and Pork Bay areas. And there were no major problems at that time. But what happened is the Indian fleet decimated their prawn fisheries on their side of the boundary, and the vessel started crossing over to our side. And this gradually intensified. And the problem with bottom trawling is that you scrape off the entire bottom, and it's not a favored process. But the difficulty has been political, that we have the ability to detain these vessels, arrest them, and we actually brought it to zero at one stage. But I think a senior official was removed. So that was the consequence of it. So this has to be settled with India. It's one of the longest standing cases of poaching.
What would be your solution if you were to ask to stop this, especially the fishermen crossing over? We arrest them, when we release them, then again 1 month later it's the same thing. Sometimes our fisherman also goes there.
Exactly.
Is there a solution that the government or authorities have not looked into, which you would suggest?
It relates to our relationship with India. How far we are able to go. It's a problem for the Indian authorities also. And there are all kinds of ramifications, you may be aware. So we had to be very firm with India, and we get no compensation. Millions of rupees worth of our resources are taken. There's no compensation. So that's the only way to go. Be very firm, and we are totally within our rights to stop that process.
Yeah. Now, as you know, Doctor, this session, this series is conducted for people to get inspiration. Our young lawyers who are in the first 5 years or maybe studying to get inspiration as to look into other avenues of law other than practicing. Right. That's the reason we feature people like you. Now, in your unique area, law of the sea. Now, I know a lot of people don't even do this law of the sea, and we'll say marine law. Sometimes they use that term as well. A young lawyer who just come out of college in the first couple of years, who's probably, I would use the term, groping in the dark as to what to do. What would you see as opportunities that are available, and how can one because this is something that you don't have much access, right? Much access. Now, I know a junior who was doing research for me. She had her father who was in the Ports Authority and all the places. She had some hunch knowledge. So because of that, she is one of the few people who are going to do I asked her what's doing a master's. She said the master's on international commercial maritime law. That is the big broad masters they have. So I think I have only heard 1 or 2 doing like that, somebody who has real background. But there are other people who may be capable, like you came into this to do it. So what would be your advice? How can a normal person who has absolutely no contact in the maritime fisheries, marine or sea related areas, a lawyer, how can that person approach, and what are the opportunities available?
I am well aware of these difficulties because those are exclusive areas that people can't get an entry to, foreign affairs in particular. Some of the ministries have their own staff, and they will not open their doors to people from outside. That tradition is not there in Sri Lanka. Yeah. And I heard in one of your earlier interviews, you asked that question. So we have to do something perhaps through the Bar Association to negotiate avenues. Now, I did that for the Attorney General Department some years ago. I said people from the Attorney General Department, for a start, because they are in government, should be given access. And as a result, we have some of them involved in the law of the sea negotiation. Foreign Ministry opened their doors to people. In my time, that was not open. It was not for me to do that. We had a small delegation. We did the negotiations. But I started another program called Our Nation and the Sea, under which we have been training people. It's a capacity building program. I think well over 100 people from Navy, Attorney General Department, and other government departments have been taken in and given exposure to these new disciplines to move on. And I must say, I see them turning up at discussions and traveling abroad, which we never saw before. So we have to do the same thing through the Bar Association, open those avenues, and also make sure that when they get their training, they have a chance to apply their skills and develop them further. These people have to evolve. They have to be placed in the right environment, like shipping. So now we have to bring people from Singapore or London, which have developed as hubs for maritime law. There are other places in Europe where we can draw in people. But I think we can be more effective in our negotiation. There have been 2 maritime incidents, as you know, in Sri Lanka, and there has been a lot of criticism of the negotiation. They've done quite well. Our people have learned in those negotiations. But question is, could we have done better for ourselves? So it's
my question again, I'm just fine tuning my question, even to bar association to approach and all that. What are the opportunities? Like, for example, if you are a lawyer who wants to be in a particular industry, you'll say whether it's media or whatever, you know how to approach those institutions. What institutes can a young lawyer approach to become a person who's specializing in law of the sea? Not the people in the registry part, of course, they get exposure. But for people who are young lawyers, who are private practitioners, absolutely no connection to the law of the sea area, nor too much in law or government. So what are the institutions that you can approach, even to bar association, to put a program together? Whom shall we can we connect?
It's primarily the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which handles the law of the sea. So they are mandated to do the law of the sea negotiations, and whatever you do has to go through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They had a legal department which was being built up. I don't think it has progressed in the manner it was done some years ago. And you have to give people exposure if they are to develop. So there has to be an understanding that this would happen. That is why I told you I managed to do this with the Attorney General Department over a number of years, and the doors were opened. We have to take this further. So someone's got to do it. And now that the Bar Association is making these inquiries, I think we have to put our heads together and find a strategy to do this. And employment is very, very important. Government salaries are not at all attractive. So this is one thing you have to handle. So we can work with the private sector also. And a joint strategy can be developed to improve these opportunities, make them more attractive for young people.
Does Nara have opportunities for employment of lawyers?
Nara does not have those opportunities, did not have them. I was trying to build up a legal capacity. I left Nara after 10 years of toil. Right, we were an excellent organization in the mid-80s. Thereafter, the war came in. We couldn't do very much. And I was asked to go back in 2010-11 to put Nara back to what she was, but it was not possible.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, Doctor, now some other, when I was talking to other panelists, say in the finance industry, insurance industry, and other inventors, there were two schools of thought about people, two schools of thoughts about young lawyers who can come up in. Now, these are non-practicing lawyers, right? They are not boardroom lawyers, like instructing attorneys or anything like that, and they are not courtroom lawyers either. But what we discovered was that you can, through experience alone, by joining in, as we'll say, management training, the finance or the other marketplace, and then build your way up with or without additional qualifications on the subject per se, right? And you can also adapt to it your other qualifications. But if somebody wants to do well like you, or in maybe another country on law of the sea area to succeed, do you recommend that person first do a master's in law of the sea or maritime, international maritime, commercial maritime, or any scientific degree which is related to with that, or is it not absolutely necessary?
There is a need to have reference to demand, the marketplace. I remember when I started Nara, there was a tussle between UNESCO and the International Oceanographic Commission and FAO in fisheries. And they were all my friends, the heads of these organizations, and they were laughing at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. They were churning out oceanographers and there would not be a demand for them. So you must not overproduce. It's very, very important to have that in mind. Otherwise, we would take people down the garden path. So we have to do that by reference to the industry, the commercial entities. That if I said the strategy has to be developed, we must have a target and develop it that way. Some people, I think having the interest is a very, very important thing, and you can filter people who come up and open doors for them. That's the most difficult thing. I've been training people right through. I think already we have trained over 150 in the Indian Ocean region, a similar number in Sri Lanka in marine affairs through annual courses we have been running. Now I find the Attorney General's department has the capacity, thanks to the training that they got from us, to run their own course for the new entrants, and that's going on. So that's very good. The Navy also does the same thing. They learn and they they become trainers when they go. So we have to do this. As I told you, a strategy is required. A lot of thinking is important, and we have to arrange a discussion. And the Bar Association might think of getting into how to open up these areas. They're not so easy, but the opportunities
how
are
much?
there.
Okay, how much does a young lawyer has opportunities in the commercial aspect? Not things like Nara and UN organs and things like that. That is one side. The commercial maritime aspect of it, the commercial side of the commercial shipping companies, and then freight forwarding companies like that. Basically, shipping companies. How much, or say how open are those companies, in your knowledge, to recruit a lawyer? Because as non-law capacity now I heard from previous discussions in the advertising and the media industry, when these people started, Varuni actually was telling that when they started and when they said that their visiting card or whatever said that they are LLB, it was something that they took seriously. A lawyer wants to be in this, so we'll take you seriously. Is that mentality there in the shipping companies, in the commercial aspect of shipping industries and industries related to maritime, where young lawyers should have opportunities, or is it not?
Definitely. Sri Lanka is a maritime nation, and we are engaged in a number of important activities in the Indian Ocean. Shipping is the most important, and shipping is growing. Will continue to grow because most of the world's cargo will move through the Indian Ocean. We are now a strategic ocean. As you know, the reason is the cargo shipping that is going. The Arctic route is opening up, but that will take perhaps 10 to 15% of the traffic from the Indian Ocean. So we can only develop, and that means the demand will grow. And we have to continue to be a hub in the Indian Ocean. So we need all the service industries, and lawyers have a role to play, and they can go into other aspects of merchant shipping with the legal background, as you recognized previously. I think it's very good to do that. So the companies recruit people on their own. We don't have to tell them. If there is a need, they take them. But I think a concerted effort might improve the opportunities for people who want to go in there. We have to look at training also. There are organizations like IMO, UNCTAD. We have to talk to them. All these, I've been in the international sphere for so long.
We means who, doctor? Who do you think would spearhead this opening? Who should spearhead looking into openings for lawyers in non-practicing areas, non-practicing areas, but industry per se, opportunities in the shipping industry? Who should you say the Bar Association do that?
That's what I'm saying. Now that the Bar Association has become very proactive through this series, the logical step forward would be to use such a forum to develop this. There's a lot of discussion that takes place in the UN. Sometimes we have meetings for years. Today, you can't have the meetings the way we used to have them, but we have Zoom and other ways of communicating. And I think you should do that. Have a focus. You have to sit down, look at it with the other professionals, and see what can be done, because this nation must have the skills to deal with an expanding international shipping industry.
Right. Doctor, you used a word when you were negotiating those things in the initial days with the UN, that you had to use both politics and diplomacy, and you have to balance it off both. Now, taking the word politics, this may be a little bit away from, but it's related to young lawyers. One of the complaints about young people in any industry who doesn't come with a background is that to get into any government thing, irrespective of which government or which color is in force, not only now, even the times 30, 40, 50, 60 years or whatever time, in Sri Lanka and most Asian countries, the complaint is that you need to have a political push, and your academics or your qualifications is in fact not in de facto, if I may use that term, is subservient to your connections. Do you agree with this statement with regard to every time in every regime in Sri Lanka? If so, how can a young person, a lawyer who does not have any such brilliant case, maybe in this academics and others like you, brilliant cases, but who doesn't have those connections, how can such person navigate to success?
This is your question. It has been going on for a long time. I think still does. But I like to believe that the situation has improved and competent people may be looked at differently. So it's beyond our control. One can only hope that we can overcome this. It depends on the case, whether it's a particular ministry or department. This can prevail in certain situations. It may not be there later on. So it depends on when you go in.
Right. Now, the recent, if you had noticed last year, there were several shipping accidents in Sri Lanka. I think there were about 2. And there were a lot of issues surrounding that. What is your take on the way things were handled?
That's what I referred to. There was some criticism, some dissatisfaction about the handling. And there are 2 ways. You can expose your officers to these situations, allow them to learn on the job. And there is the risk that mistakes can be made. There could be shortcomings. We don't really know. We only have criticism. And unless you get into it, you don't know what happened. So one can hope that they have done their best in these situations, but you have to build capacity. We can't be waiting for incident after incident to develop that capacity. One thing is to get people from outside who are competent and let them work side by side with our people. That way you can build your capacity fast.
With regard to, you wrote, you are author of a couple of great publications. Can you tell us something about your publications?
Well, my PhD thesis was on islands. It was written partly for the practitioner. When I was completing it, I had sit on that part and I had an opportunity to talk to many representatives of states. Some of the top people in the world were there at the Lordsley conference and they were dealing with maritime boundaries. So one day the ambassador of Iceland would say, would you like to sit down and have a cup of coffee? And he will pull out his maps and tell you about his problem and we discuss it. So that way I learned a lot. And I think that publication was helpful and still selling for a few $100. So there must be a demand for it. And that is what is important, to analyze the rules that apply to delimitation. They can be applied elsewhere. I have done other publications in areas of interest. I have wide-ranging interests, my hobbies, like wildlife. I was able to do a guidebook to the Yala National Park.
Right.
And I think it was helpful. I was in Africa, and there was a $5 publication to the national parks, which was very, very helpful for the casual visitor. And we modeled it on that. I ended up with 150 pages of research. I decided to publish it all. So it went out to people. I would share it with the world. If I didn't do it, that information would have been lost to posterity.
Okay. With regard to education, that is education with regard to law of the sea and international commercial maritime law, what are your advices? Should we have more courses on those areas, more vibrant courses, more developed curriculum in those areas in university postgraduate level, or what we have at the moment? Are you satisfied with?
Yeah, I wish I would have the straight answer for you.
Yeah,
but it's something that requires thought and discussion, study before we come up. That's what I indicated by saying we should work out a strategy of knowledgeable people, call them in, talk to them, and I'm sure we will do better than where we are right now if we did that. So try to work out a strategy and implement it. Even if it's implemented by half, you have achieved something.
The role of the universities in this regard, what do you see as a role other than biostation?
Yeah, the role of the universities is what they do normally, not to find education, and one has to draw a line very carefully between what a university does and is expected to do and the requirements of employment and career development. There are bridging mechanisms. There are institutes in some of the universities. They work sometimes, sometimes they don't. So I think you need something like a link with the private professional organizations who can open the door to employment for younger people. We should have the opportunities considering the volume of traffic that goes through. Now, you are probably aware, I will digress for a moment with regard to marine mammals. So I who went in 1980 to IMO and set up the traffic separation scheme, because there was a fear that if there was a collision, all our beaches would have got spoiled. Tourism had just started developing. And you may have been too young, but I remember my father showing me ships crossing just off the coast near Galle and southern area. And he would jokingly say, here they're going to collide. They're going past each other so close to the shore, close to each other. That gave me the idea to set up a traffic separation scheme at IMO. So I went to IMO with the master attendant of Colombo Port, Captain Chinnaya. We were great friends. And we went to IMO. A lot of work was done before that. We broadcast to passing vessels from Colombo radio, collected the data. We found some of them didn't even bother to respond. East European vessels seem to be more disciplined. And we have today devices like automatic identification systems, AIS, where we can track them electronically. We have been doing that. But at that time, we had enough of a return and we could see visually, it was possible to observe these vessels so close to shore, as I told you. The danger was pretty obvious. So I went to IMO with Captain Chinnaya and we looked at the procedure to do it. Then I had a colleague in IMO who said, look and get into the working group. So being a lawyer, that is where your training helps. I went into the working group. Normally you come from the main committee down the ladder to the working group. There's nothing to prevent me going straight into the working group. So I said, very urgent. Then I was blocked by some people. He said, the procedure is not right. I said, there's nothing to preclude me from getting in. This is an urgent situation. I had to call on the Secretary General of IMO. So you must have the courage to do those things. Dr. Srivastava, a kind man, I said, Dr. Srivastava, I come to get this done. If it's not being done, I'm going back home.
Yeah.
So he said, calm down. And after lunch, he talked to the people. And we started building the traffic separation scheme from the bottom up. But done in record time because there was the actual danger of collision. So they're still operating, and because of marine mammals, there are complaints that marine mammals are being chopped up. I'm a man who started whale watching. I started the National Marine Mammal Program. I love whales like I love elephants and other animals. Although I was at one time a hunter, I have gone into conservation. So we don't have the justification to alter the traffic separation scheme. We had a meeting with some of the so-called international experts, and the maritime lobby, I must say, was very impressed with them. Master Marine has tore the scientists to shreds. And still there isn't a compelling reason, though I know there are people who are talking about moving the traffic separation scheme further out to sea. Just think of the danger when you move the ships 50 miles or so out to sea. They may take another stop elsewhere for whatever they want and not in Colombo, not come to Colombo. So this is a dangerous game you're playing. And with less information about the impact on whales, it's difficult to justify the change.
Yeah, so it's love to know about your interest in marine mammals. There are different stories, they're not even confirmed, but are there other what shall we call the marine mammals or the animals in the sea, in the broader sense, are they being threatened to extinction, at least some of them, due to the increasing traffic? Because I saw a documentary done by James Cameron, a filmmaker, on the underwater. You might have seen that some other channel. He has done a lot of research to do that because he has his love with sea from, I think, Titanic. But one of the things he said was that certain mammals, I can't remember the exact mammal, are in not at the moment extinction, but in the threat of extinction due to the increasing traffic of ships and even submarines, right? And submarines are not as much as sea. Is my take correct on this? Are there at least a certain area, a certain of mammals threatened to extinction due to the increasing traffic in sea?
I would be cautious about using the word extinction. Right? And this is a complaint about Sri Lanka, south of Sri Lanka. You have to see the numbers. Much of this is being said without scientific evidence. The information is being collected from boat operators. That's not proper science.
Correct.
That's unreliable. I know the individuals. So I think we have to have proper scientific research, and that is not being done. So marine mammals are regarded as a different subject to fisheries, not serious enough, but they should be recognizing that because marine mammals provide millions of dollars in income to Sri Lanka. It's a growing industry. Now, yesterday or day before, I saw a report that humpback populations have risen. And many years ago, I spoke to my Japanese colleagues who run the Center for Cetacean Research, and they told me there are too many sperm whales in the Indian Ocean. And I said, you want to eat them? And he laughed. He said, I also love whales. But with these populations go up and down. And I said, I hope I don't live for the day when these numbers have to be culled. That's how they manage wildlife populations in many countries. The population goes too far up. You have to control that population. It's not a
I'm
very
sorry. I'm sorry. The documentary was on James Cameron's documentary was on whales. It was on whales. He said the whales could be in threat of extinction. Is that correct? Not really.
Now we have this very positive development about the humpbacks. So some of the other whales may be coming back. Some of them may have been set back too far for them to recover.
Right. Doctor, what is the current position of the law of the sea? Are there major development, as an expert in that area, are there major developments which you see? I'm not talking about our region, worldwide, that has to be addressed and which are not addressed, taking into consideration of the rising sea level. And as you would know, a lot of even celebrities and people get involved, and sometimes they put out may be correct, they put out may not be correct, and the global warming. And because of that, are there necessities to change the law of the sea, demarcations and area to tackle this biological or ecological condition? Are there major changes needed?
Well, the law of the sea, I see it as something dynamic. After the third conference, I spoke about a fourth, and people held their heads in horror. It was such a big task to conclude the third conference. But there are things to be done. The deep seabed regime was cut out at that time. It's still under discussion in Jamaica at the Seabed Authority because the United States walked out, refusing to share the technology with developing countries. And their argument is where we take the trouble to develop it and we had to give it to you guys. So that regime is evolving. And right now, there is a great rush for seabed resources once more. It is pegged to the land-based minerals prices. If those prices increase, you can justify deep seabed mining, not otherwise.
Coming back to Sri Lanka and opportunities for young lawyers in the marine industry and the sea industry, which is you are involved in, we break up. I think we are. Firstly, are we actually so strategically placed? Srinkamali Harbour, Colombo Harbour, Hambantota, all this. Are we so strategically placed that everybody wants us? Is my one question. And the other question coupled to us that, if so, we must be having so many opportunities related to harbour, shipping, and other areas related to sea. If so, what are those opportunities that are available, which we are not explored?
Well, you can see over my shoulder, the area that comes within our jurisdiction or should be within our jurisdiction very soon, without question. And something I want to do is stimulate interest in that offshore area. We have to look at it. It's our backyard. We don't really know it. How many people know the different provinces of that huge deep seabed area? We have to develop capacity. And we're going to need people in the law as well if you are to move to resources. Much of it is in very deep water. So the technology has to come. But there are other things that can be done in the meantime. We have to make resource assessments as we go, very costly, and that relates to the prospect of recovery. How many years will it take to recover these resources? Is there a resource potential that makes it worthwhile investing? So when I was asked what was down there, they said that's deep water. I said, doesn't matter. My job is to secure the maximum territory for Sri Lanka. What is done with that in the future is beyond my realm. So we have to develop capacity, not only in
what you recovered for Sri Lanka, has that been eroded out in the period? Also, is there more that we have to take now because of the situation, or have you taken the best of what we really need for our?
Places like Nara need a lot of strengthening. There were certain intentions in developing that. I had proposed having indulged in capacity building and seen the difficulties. People said, as soon as you leave Nara, they will all leave. And they didn't believe it, but they all left. So there's a new crop of people, different attitudes have come in. You have to motivate people. And I had proposed an international institution to bring in foreign scientists to work with the local people. There's a different work ethic and the hope that our people would benefit by working with them. I hope that can be done because having been through the mill, I tried to develop national capacity for over 10 years. So it has not worked. Sometimes I'll tell people it's like Audie Murphy. You know, Audie Murphy was a decorated soldier and he wrote the book To Hell and Back. I've been there, I've seen it. So that's a difficulty in building capacity in government. It's not lasting. When I went to build Nara, the senior administrator, she said, Dr. Javon, you are 20 years ahead of your time. I wasn't sure whether it was a compliment or she was saying that I didn't know what I was doing. So we have the same problem. The Indian Ocean, when we built the Indian Ocean cooperation regime, that was 1980-81 when I called for the first study on prospects for Indian Ocean cooperation. Sri Lanka had been ahead with proposing the zone of peace in 71 under Mrs. Bandaranaike in the United Nations, but that was stifled because of the big powers who are now active in the Indian Ocean. They knew what their future role was going to be, so they stifled that. And now we have become a battleground, a place for rivalries of big powers. You're seeing that developing. You're asking me about harbors. I watch the weapons developments going on. If your vessels are in harbor, they are good to protect from a storm, but not from a tactical missile that will take out the entire harbor. So what is the protection you have? So it is only in peacetime to provide supplies, etc. You can't refuel or do anything if you're at war.
Yeah. Doctor, this for young lawyers, what would be your advice, people who have like studied law and come to your position? What would be your general advice to young lawyers who are wanting to be somewhere else beyond court practice and not to practice law as a court lawyer or write deeds or be an instructing attorney or be even a legal officer? You know, legal officer is the role of law in companies, but to get integrated into different businesses, especially in the business area of law of the sea and shipping and maritime and etc. What is your overall advice to young lawyers?
As you have quite correctly noted, there are some areas that are difficult to get into. I think those difficulties continue. There has to be a willingness on one side to take those people into the organizations and build capacity. There are limits also to what corporate entities can do. As you know, the economic situation is not very good and they have to cut down on their expenses. So it's difficult to do these altruistic things in those entities. So it's a balance that you've got to find. Look at the environment, national environment, whether we have the capacity to bring these people in. I think as we go along, we should be able to have a dialogue. And I say Bar Association and these corporate entities to examine them, and also government organizations. There has to be realization that you have to build capacity for the country. And there should be a joint strategy. If you can work towards that, that will be helpful.
Yeah, but the students per se, or students or people who are coming out, what would be your advice to them to come up to, or what is your personal advice to them, if I may ask that? Not in the profession per se, personal advice, somebody to build up themselves.
You have to go out in the world and find those opportunities around people going around offering tickets to people.
Yeah.
I did that. From the university, I went to the foreign ministry, I talked to the legal advisor and got to know what was going on. So I was knocking on the door all the time, except that I entered the foreign ministry, as I told you, for different circumstances. But people have to be outgoing and talk, and sometimes the doors open. So that's what you can do right now. No one is going to carry you and place you on a golden seat. You have to work your way up. And I will tell them that they have to persevere. It's very important to persevere in what they're doing. But there's a lot that professionals can do to help individuals find those placements.
Right. Dr. Jayavarna, thank you very much for joining us today on our chat, and thank you for sharing all those very experiences you had and what you did, and thanks for all that. And I think anybody who wanted to come into your field had a lot of in-depth knowledge, both scientific side and legal side on that, and thank you for sharing that. And we hope to join you once again sometime, engage with you in another discussion like this sometime later. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and to all your colleagues in the Bar Association for the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Hiran Jayawardena is current Secretary General of Indian Ocean Marine Corporation, was my guest today on the 156th episode of the webinar series of the Bar Association. And this series, as you know, is called Beyond Code Practice. I'll join you again, not next Tuesday, but next Wednesday at the same time. That's 7 o'clock with another episode of Beyond Code Practice. And we have another very interesting, very versatile, vibrant, experienced guest on that day. That is none other than the present chairperson of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, Kimali Vikramasinghe. Kimali is also a highly qualified lawyer with a discipline in different areas, experiences in the finance sector, the banking sector, and now the tourism sector. We will talk to Kimali for her insights on next Wednesday at 7 o'clock right here on this webinar series of Beyond Code Practice. I'll see you then. Have a good night and have a good week.